In a speech several days ago, House Speaker Paul Ryan sought to distance himself from himself, or at least his own words. Watch.
I fell into the trap of thinking about makers and takers in the wrong way, about people who are struggling and for a moment need to be dependent upon government who don't want to be. So I was callous and I oversimplified and I castigated people with a broad brush. That's wrong, and there's a lot of that happening in America today. I myself have made that mistake.
All right, so he's also added that takers wasn't how to refer to a single mom stuck in a poverty trap, just trying to take care of her family. Most people don't want to be dependent. That's true. And to label a whole group of Americans that way was wrong. I shouldn't castigate a large group of Americans to make a point. So I stopped thinking about it that way and talking about it that way. But I didn't come out and say all this to be politically correct. I was just wrong. Well, wrong he was. Now for context, Mother Jones had put together a compilation of Paul Ryan talking about the makers and the takers. Now let's take a look at that.
Right now, about 60% of the American people get more benefits in dollar value from the federal government than they pay back in taxes. So we're going to a majority of takers versus makers in America.
Chasing ever higher spending with ever higher tax rates will decrease the number of makers in society and increase the number of takers.
We do not want to have a nation of a majority of takers. We want to have a nation of a majority of makers. Today, 70% of Americans get more benefits from the federal government in dollar value than they pay back in taxes. So you could argue that we're already past that tipping point. And so we have that proverbial fork in the road ahead of us, that choice of two futures. Do you want the American idea of an opportunity society with a safety net, where you can take a risk, start a business, make a difference, succeed, and be honored for being successful? Or do we go down the path the president's proposing? A social welfare state, a cradle-to-grave society, where we have more takers than makers.
You saw it with the New Deal and the Great Society, and now the attempt is to give us a third and final great wave of progressivism to finish the completion of replacing the American ideal with a social welfare state.
And so what I think the president's trying to do is create more of a permanent class of government dependence.
So he apologized once for all those other times that he's addressed to makers and takers. But see, I'm not buying it. Sure, apologizing for the rhetoric is kind of nice, makes you feel a little fluffy inside, right? But if you still continue to champion the same punish the poor policies that you've been pushing all along, well, that just shows you just being a fucking hypocrite. Look, Speaker Ryan's policies aren't any different than they've been before. They continue to blame poor people for being poor and to cut off their assistance to people who can't actually find work. His solution to the poverty trap is to cut your legs out from under you instead of try to lift you up. In order to lift yourself up, you need to be paid a living wage and maybe an education that's affordable, and maybe even childcare for people who have families who are trying to get ahead. That stuff will help you get out of poverty much more than saying, oh, you're getting food stamps, cutting your food stamps. Well, how's that going to help? Is that going to make me work harder? I already work 2 fucking jobs. How's that going to make me work harder if you cut down my only lifeline? And that's the problem with Paul Ryan and his policies. And that's the problem with this, is that he hasn't changed. See, bootstraps are not they're not enough for everyone. Some people might be able to do it, sure. But the same cannot be said for the millions of people who do end up working their balls off, but never get a break. Never get a break. In fact, that single mother would benefit far more from her taxes actually going to fund her own child care than to cover, for example, tax cuts for the rich. Something that Paul Ryan is very much in favor of. See, Paul Ryan is in favor of trickle-down economics. More trickle-down economics and tossing more bootstraps at the people that he claims that he actually wants to help. And look, the rhetoric is nice, changing that and apologizing for that, but until his policies change, he's nothing more than the same old Paul Ryan that actually still doesn't give a fuck about you.